12, 21, 9. That's a love line. And read properly. It says something like this. Love arrives through a familiar emotional pattern. The lesson in the middle is learning to stay whole inside a connection, and the direction it's growing toward is a partnership where both people still get to be themselves. That took 20 seconds. Most people spend an hour looking up 3 numbers separately and end up with 3 sentences that don't fit together. By the end of this, you'll be able to do what I just did, with your own 3 numbers. Here's what usually happens. You find your chart. You locate the love line. You've got 3 numbers, so you search the first one, and you get a paragraph. You search the second, another paragraph. The third, another. And now you're holding 3 descriptions that sound like 3 different people. One says you're independent. One says you're afraid of abandonment. One says you're generous and warm. So which is it? The answer is that it's none of them. Individually, a love line isn't 3 labels stacked up. It's one movement, read in one direction, and the meaning comes from the movement, not from the parts. That's why blog posts on this leave you unsatisfied. Not because the individual meanings are wrong. They're usually roughly right. It's that a list can't show you a sequence, and this is a sequence. There's a second reason it goes wrong, and it's the bigger one. The same number does not mean the same thing in every position. Energy 15 sitting on the left of your love line is describing something genuinely different from energy 15 sitting in the center. Same number, different job. Almost nothing online tells you that. And it's the difference between a reading that fits and one that doesn't. So here's what we're doing. 4 passes. First, find your love line on the chart properly, so you're certain you've got the right 3 numbers. Second, understand what each of the 3 positions is actually asking. Third, all 22 energies and what each one brings to love. And fourth, I'll read a complete line end to end so you can hear the whole thing assembled. By the end, you won't need me for your own chart. Let's start with the part people quietly get wrong. On the chart, the love line runs as a short diagonal in the lower half. It travels up and to the right. It starts at a node on the lower left and moves toward the center of the chart. 3 numbers sitting on that diagonal. This is an example chart. It is not yours. The numbers you see here belong to this birth date. What matters is the position, not these particular values. Now, 2 things people get wrong here. The first is direction. You read this line from left to right. Left, center, right. If you read it backwards, you will get a story that runs the wrong way. The mature end arrives first, and the entry pattern arrives last. And it will feel like it almost fits, which is worse than obviously not fitting. The second is the shared corner. The node at the lower left end of the love line also belongs to another line on the chart. It is a corner where 2 things meet. That is not an error. And it does not mean the number is doing 2 jobs at once. It means the chart is economical. The same point gets read differently, depending on which line you are traveling along. So when you are reading the love line, read it as the love line. Don't import meaning from the other direction. Here is what to do now. Find the diagonal. Take the 3 numbers. Write them down, left to right. If you want to follow along with your own, pause here and get them. Everything after this is going to use them. Now the part that makes the whole system work. Each of the 3 positions is asking a different question. Not a different intensity of the same question, a genuinely different one. The left position is what enters. This is the pattern that arrives with you when a relationship begins. It's often inherited, something you watched before you were old enough to evaluate it. Or it's the instinct that decides who you notice across a room. It isn't your choice, exactly. It's what's already running when the choice appears. The center position is the lesson. This is the one people feel most, and it's the one worth the most attention. The center is what becomes visible under intimacy, the thing that shows up when someone is genuinely close. It's also the mechanism that keeps a pattern cycling. If something repeats in your relationships and you can't work out why, the center is usually where the answer lives. The right position is the mature direction, not a prediction and not a promise. It's what becomes available when the center lesson is met consciously rather than avoided. It's the quality the line is developing toward. Notice the shape of that. Something arrives. Something is learned. Something becomes possible. That's a story, and it's why 3 separate meanings never add up. You are reading 3 still frames of a moving thing. One more time, because this is the whole method. Left is what enters. Center is the lesson. Right is what becomes possible. That's the method. If nothing else in this video sticks, that will still work on your chart tonight. If it was useful, subscribe. I'm working through the whole chart this way, one line at a time, and the next one is the karmic tail. Now, let's do all 22. Before the list, one demonstration, because this is the part that separates reading a chart from looking up meanings. Take energy 15, desire, magnetism, attachment, power. On the left, 15 is describing what pulls you in. Attraction arrives fast and physically, and you tend to notice intensity before you notice compatibility. That's an entry pattern. In the center, 15 is something else entirely. Now attachment is the lesson. The work is staying conscious inside a strong pull, keeping boundaries when chemistry is arguing against them. Same number, completely different job. So as we go through these, hold the position in mind. I'll give you what each energy brings to love, what it needs, and where it tends to go in shadow. Then you apply it to the position it's actually sitting in. 5 energies here: 2, 9, 12, 14, 18. 2. The High Priestess. Brings intuition and depth, needs emotional safety and honesty above everything, and often understands other people long before saying anything about its own needs. In shadow, it goes quiet and expects to be guessed at. 9. The Hermit. Brings depth and independence, loves quietly rather than demonstratively, and needs trust and genuine space. In shadow, it withdraws instead of saying the difficult thing. 12. The Hanged Man. Brings patience and a willingness to give. May sacrifice heavily or stay suspended in situations that aren't resolving. What it needs is boundaries and reciprocity, the giving to run both directions. 14. Temperance. Brings balance and real skill at compromise. Seeks peaceful, steady connection. In shadow, it tolerates far too much to avoid disruption. 18. The Moon. Brings emotional sensitivity and imagination. Senses small shifts very strongly, and needs reassurance and truth in about equal measure. In shadow, it projects fear onto uncertainty, filling silence with the worst available story. 4 energies: 1, 7, 21, 22. 1. The Magician. Brings initiative, tends to lead, needs stimulation and freedom to act. In shadow, it dominates the conversation or finds compromise genuinely difficult. 7. The Chariot. Brings drive and momentum, protects independence strongly. In shadow, it treats an emotional problem like something to be defeated, rather than a feeling to be understood. 21. The World. Brings expansion and shared vision, needs growth and freedom inside the relationship, and is often drawn to distance or difference. In shadow, it stays busy and expansive as a way of not being intimate. 22. The Fool. Brings spontaneity and authenticity, needs playfulness and room to be itself. In shadow, it fears commitment or steps back as responsibility arrives. 4 energies: 4, 5, 8, 20. 4. The Emperor. Brings stability and protection, shows love through action rather than words, and values loyalty and commitment. In shadow, it becomes controlling or emotionally unreachable. 5. The Hierophant. Brings values and clear commitment, needs shared belief and defined expectations. In shadow, it imposes rigid rules or stays out of duty long after the reason has gone. 8. Justice. Brings fairness and accountability, needs equality and honesty. In shadow, it turns critical or starts measuring love as though love were a ledger. 20. Judgment. Brings themes of family, forgiveness, and second chances. Relationships here often activate something ancestral. What it needs is accountability without permanent blame. 4 energies: 3, 6, 17, 19. 3. The Empress. Brings warmth, generosity, and creativity. Needs appreciation. In shadow, it overfunctions, giving more and more in order to feel needed. 6. The Lovers. Brings harmony and genuine partnership orientation. Needs reciprocity and shared values. In shadow, it loses its own outline inside the relationship, or delays a decision that's already been made internally. 17. The Star. Brings hope, inspiration, and friendship. Needs admiration and emotional openness. In shadow, it idealizes a person or seeks validation through attention. 19. The sun brings joy and expressiveness, needs appreciation and honesty. In shadow, it needs constant attention or steers around difficult feelings to keep things bright. 5 energies: 10, 11, 13, 15, 16. These are the ones that most need conscious handling. 10. The wheel. Relationships move in strong cycles and turning points. Needs adaptability. In shadow, it mistakes unpredictability for excitement. 11. Strength. Brings passion and protectiveness. In shadow, it creates power struggles or confuses intensity with intimacy. 13. Transformation. Relationships here are genuinely transformative. Needs honesty about what has to change. In shadow, it fears abandonment or stays attached to something that has already ended. 15. The devil. Strong attraction and strong attachment. Needs boundaries and emotional responsibility. In shadow, jealousy, dependency, power struggles. 16. The tower. Sudden truths and resets that clear what wasn't honest. Needs honesty before pressure builds. In shadow, it reacts explosively or stays inside instability because instability has become familiar. Let's assemble one properly, using the line from the opening. 12, 21, 9. 12 on the left. What enters is a pattern of giving. This person arrives in relationships already willing to sacrifice, already willing to wait. It's generous and it's real. And it means the entry point is a slight imbalance, because the giving starts before anything has been established. 21 in the center. The lesson is freedom inside connection, not freedom instead of connection. Inside it, this is someone who needs a relationship that doesn't shrink them, and the lesson shows up as a live tension between wanting closeness and needing to stay expansive. And notice how that lands on top of 12. Someone who gives easily, learning not to give away the part of themselves that needs room. 9 on the right. The mature direction is depth and self-possession, loving quietly, from a settled place, with trust rather than performance. Read as one movement. Love arrives through giving. The lesson is staying whole inside the connection, and the direction it's growing toward is a steady, self-possessed depth. That's a sentence you can actually use. Now, let's do a second one, a different shape entirely, so you can hear the method produce 2 genuinely different readings. 16, 15, 14, 16 on the left. What enters is disruption. This is someone whose relationships tend to begin after something has broken. A reset, a truth that arrived suddenly, a structure that collapsed and cleared the ground. It is not a bad entry point. It is an honest one. But it means love often starts in the middle of change, rather than instability. 15 in the center. And remember what we said earlier. 15 in the center is not the same as 15 on the left. Here, attachment is the lesson. The pull is strong, the chemistry is real, and the work is staying conscious inside it, keeping boundaries when the intensity is arguing against them. Now notice how that sits on top of 16. Someone who arrives through upheaval, learning to tell the difference between intensity and safety, because for them, those two things have often shown up together. 14 on the right. The mature direction is balance and healing. Steady, moderate, unhurried connection, not dramatic. Deliberately not dramatic. So, love arrives through disruption. The lesson is staying conscious inside strong attachment, and the direction it is growing toward is something calm enough to be trusted. Compare that to the first line we read. 12, 21, 9. Giving, freedom, depth. Same method, completely different story. That is the whole point. The method does not tell you what your line says. It tells you how to read what your line says. One more thing, and I'd rather say it than have you find out the hard way. Your love line does not tell you who you will meet. It does not tell you when. It doesn't name a soulmate. It doesn't predict a marriage, and it doesn't predict a separation. Anyone reading those out of 3 numbers is telling you a story, not reading a chart. What it does is describe patterns, how you tend to enter, what tends to become visible when someone gets close, and what becomes available when you meet that consciously. That's less dramatic. It's also the part that's actually useful, because a pattern is something you can do something about. A prediction just sits there. And the shadow expressions I've described aren't verdicts. Every energy has a constructive form and a shadow form, and which one is running is not fixed. So, left is what enters, center is the lesson, right is what becomes possible. 3 numbers, 1 movement, read left to right. If you want to go further, the karmic tale uses the same method on the line most people are frightened of, and it's far less ominous than the internet suggests. That one's next. Comment your 3 love line numbers, left to right, and I'll read some of them. Chart numbers only, please. Never your full birth date in a public comment.